All right, so today I'm going to talk about discernment. I've spoken about it a few times, but it's really important. It's an important aspect to anchor in your experience because, the ego is a shapeshifter, and if your personality structure tends to get glamored into confusion, right, even by spiritual concepts, a lot of people that I work with in Rohan, when I ask their subconscious mind, like, tell me the ways that the trickster shows up for you. The trickster being any way that you get kind of tricked by your own mind into remaining in low energy. A very common thing is gurus, spiritual teachings, an image of a church, right? Spiritual teachings and conditioning can be kind of hijacked by the ego. And so the reason why I say this is because, there's this teaching which, in order to truly anchor the awakened state, which, by the way, in my universe is not only, being, awareness, being aware of itself, or beyond that, no experiencer. It's not just that, it's also the awakening of the mental body and the energy body and the physical body. And it's interesting because somebody last night sent me a video on a scientist giving a lecture to some Tibetan monks. And he was saying, he was kind of proving to them scientifically that the practices they've been doing for thousands of years are scientifically sound. And one of those things that he mentioned was that visualization increases the biophotonism, the bioluminescence of the physical body, which I've discussed a lot. I discuss a lot about visualization. And so, but the point of this video is, discernment can be put in the shadow. And I did a video on that. Have you put discernment in your shadow? Have you, while part of awakening is kind of deconstructing the duality of right and wrong, at the end of the day, there's still energy, right? And so if mentally you understand nothing is either good or bad, and that everything is God, I hope at the end of the day, you will not still, let a pedophile babysit your kids. You won't let somebody manage your money who feels untrustworthy. You wouldn't let somebody do hands-on healing to you that has a certain energy about them, right? This is where discernment comes in, and it is equally as important as anchoring the understanding that everything is God. So let's just make it very clear that, like, spiritual vision, right? Seeing love in everything and discernment are not mutually exclusive, okay? We have the ability to see love everywhere. And then when something is in our experience, we have the ability to tap into this feminine aspect of intuition and discernment, the ability to read energy in order to make kind decisions, right? Discernment reduces violence, because if I'm interviewing people to take care of my dying mother or grandmother or to babysit my child, like, thank goodness I'm aware of my intuition where I can read the energy, right? And this is not about trying to control reality. It's about using what is here, the information that is here, to make kind choices for yourself and for others. And, it becomes, people are like, well, what if you, no matter what happens, like, it's for the good of all. It's like, yeah, but that's philosophical. Like, let's be real with what is and acknowledge what is here. Let ourselves acknowledge what we are aware of energetically. So, the philosophical world of non-duality is very romantic. It's very romantic, and it can glamour you, right? If you think about True Blood, like the vampires, when they would, it's like mythology, like vampire mythology, they would like look you in the eye and glamour you into like basically believing anything they say. Well, the ego can use spiritual concepts to glamour itself back into a state of confusion and therefore disconnect you from the energy. So I'm energizing this in as many ways as I can, so that we can anchor all of our qualities, not just stay in the philosophical realm of like everything is myself, everything is love, everything is God, and to the detriment of what we feel arising in the moment, what we feel energetically in a situation. And the energy that's coming off of someone is underneath emotion, in the sense that what you sense is real. Okay, your reaction to it, what you project onto it, is something else. So I can sense, for example, if I'm interviewing somebody to take care of my grandmother, I can sense a dishonesty. I can even get impressions about their intentions. I can be aware of a lot of information. But then if I react to that and I say, oh, that scum, that blah, 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 whatever I project onto God, right, is a lie, because it's still God. But do I want to choose it? Do I want to make it part of my experience? No. Right? In the same way, like I've used these kind of exaggerated, silly examples of like, well, if there's, food in a buffet and there's one piece of food that's clearly rotting or smells really bad, like it's still God, but I don't need to put it in my mouth. Right? This sounds so obvious, and I give obvious examples to cut through the ego's tendency to glamour itself with philosophy, into remaining, confused and disconnected from reality. And there's an epidemic in this world that we are disconnected from reality, which means the energy, right? Reality is fun in the fundamental sense of like, yes, everything is God, but there's also a relative truth, right? Real non-duality includes the relative truth. So, I'll give an example for my life to ground this into reality. I had a very strong spontaneous awakening, and I was seeing like love out of this individual who was behaving very deceptively, dishonestly, and he was part of my family. And I was focusing exclusively on the love, to the exclusion of my discernment. I was aware that there was so much off about the way this being was showing up. I was aware of it, but I ignored it because my ego used something real, which is unconditional love and the reality that all is love, but used it to keep me fractured from what I know, right? From what I know. It's the same thing, like I was observing recently a group of people talk about some tantric sex practices. And I don't know much about that. But what I do know is that sexuality can be a very powerful tool for awakening if you are engaging in that behavior in true love, just like love and honor and reverence of that other being. And these people were using the idea everything is God. Like if you don't find love in the kink and in this, and if you don't find God in those things, then you don't get reality. And like, while there was some wisdom to that, right? Everything is God. But when I was feeling their energy, at least this is how I felt it. It's like they were using a concept to justify their kind of lower astral addiction to lust. And by lower, it's like saying, okay, addiction and people with addictions are God too, but the energy of addiction is an energy, right? There's a relative truth that there are levels of energy. And oftentimes when you go to if you walked into a bar, or if you walked into a strip club or something, like, you would feel, right, if you're sensitive to energy, you would feel like there's a lot of this lust, and like, even my parts of me are giving me feedback right now just because I'm tuning into that. And am I judging it and saying it's bad? No, right? This is where unconditional love and discernment like can coexist. And this is how, like, relative to me, right? When I tune into that, like, I'm getting feedback like, don't tune into this energy, this is not for you. Same thing with music, right? Like, all music has beauty in it. All music has beauty in it, it really does. But there's like this relative truth as well that, you know, I used to listen to all different kinds of music to help me move energy, and that's perfectly fine. That's where I was at the time. But now I simply cannot listen to music that has any like kind of violence or any kind of like negative messages about women, or like, that stuff matters. It matters. It's like what the Buddha talks about, the nutriments, like what you ingest, right? So the Buddha knows everything is myself, right? Everything is the Buddha. Yet he's also saying, like, watch what you take in. Like, don't swallow just anything. Don't ingest just anything. Because part of the relative aspect of enlightenment, at least the way that is real for me, right? For me, absolute truth includes relative truth. And so there's a certain awakening that happens within the energy field, within the physical body, right? The body can become light. The body can become more luminescent, have more of like a density of light in it. And that's my experience. And I've put photos of my hands and the marks that they make on my legs when I meditate, because a few years ago, I would look down at my legs and I would realize, oh, like, there's burns in my legs, because there's the universal love is coming through me, because that's what I want. And so in order to be able to have the awakening be in every dimension of yourself, like, yes, you have to completely accept and love yourself and all beings like exactly as they are, but you don't have to choose them, right? You don't have to take them home with you. You don't have to do anything, right? It's like, I hope in the relative sense, right? If you're connected to your heart and you're connected to like higher love, and you're connected to, you're conscious of yourself as light, then you won't, you know, in a very real, grounded way, you won't sell your soul for that business deal. You won't hire that sketchy nanny or caretaker just because you're in a rush and you don't feel like dealing with this. You won't, you know, hang out with people that have power or status, or even have lots of other good qualities, yet when you're with them, you feel a dissonance, right? You feel a dissonance. We ignore that dissonance. We ignore that, right? In a lot of ways, this happens in the context of spiritual teachers. They speak really great words. They seem very stable in certain aspects of the awakening process, yet you feel an offness about it. You feel an offness about it. And so my recommendation would be to listen to that immediately, and don't choose it. Don't choose to ingest it in your experience, right? So discernment is not judgment. Judgment would be if I said, oh, well, that guru is blah, 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 like a bad person, or they shouldn't exist, or like an aspect, if I got really upset about an aspect of them, right, I would look at, you know, is there a part of me that's similar that I haven't accepted and loved? But having just that clear knowing, right, that's just information that it would be useful to listen to. And then, you know, there's a lot of ways that we just ignore, right? Why do we ignore that voice? It's usually because of desire, right? If you want something from someone, and the desire, when I say desire, I don't mean pure desire coming from the heart. I mean desire coming from a sense of lack. So I want to fit in with this group of people, and I want to have a certain exposure for my business. So I'm going to hang out with these people, even though almost every time I hang out with them, like I feel this, this feeling that I disassociate from, right? I glamour myself out of, maybe with logic, like, oh, but everything is God, and I should sit here and just like focus on that. It's like, yeah, like you should walk away from that experience without judgment, knowing that like everything is God, but don't ignore the feeling aspect, right? Don't ignore the feeling aspect, the like really enlightenment or ascension or becoming light. It has to include the union of the poles. There has to be a balance between masculine and feminine energy, and our intuition, right? Our ability to, you know, create structure like a spiritual practice and say, I will observe only love, right? That's like this male energy, like it's intention. But then we have this feeling reality where it's like, okay, but this doesn't feel safe for me right now. You know, I feel off. Like a really simple example is you get into a cab and, ooh, like you just don't feel right in there. So you get out, right? We have to honor like all of the aspects of our intelligence. So unconditional love and intuition coexist. Discernment is not judgment, right? What your projections are what you do after you feel something, right? What you project onto it, what you making something wrong, you pushing against something in your mind. That's exclusion, right? That's exclusion. But like I said, like if you're going to operate in the physical world and make decisions about money, about family, about health, about like what you will ingest, it's very important to be aware of energy. And in order to kind of be aware of like where your astral body, like where you have an astral body, right? The astral body it's really a combination of thoughts and emotions. It's like desires and fears, but the desires come from really a place of lack. And so, right, when people say you must master your astral body, sometimes the desires of the astral body might actually feel benevolent or loving to you, but they're actually addictive, right? Like in the case of, like lust is just a good example. Now, am I saying sexuality is bad? Am I saying living any certain way is bad or having multiple partners is bad? No, I'm not saying anything is bad. There's just an energy of lust. There's like it's like this, it's like a hunger, like a carnal hunger. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But like if you just considered like a certain reality about energy, right? Being in like a sincerely loving relationship, whether that's with one people or many people, whatever, that's one thing. And it's like the difference between a laser beam of focused energy versus scattered energy, right? I mentioned that when you like join with someone in a physical way, you literally take on their psyche. And right, if you're trying to get clear and clear your field and raise your energy, like that can be difficult if you're always like joining with a lot of people. It's just a physical fact. And people that I have been friends with my whole life who used to enjoy like being with many people, they've told me without me explaining this to them, they're like, yeah, like that's just what I've realized, right? I'm not saying everybody will realize that, but the point is like if you have this tendency to basically sell yourself out for any reason, right? If you have a tendency to tune into things that honestly feel bad to you, but you know, it's so familiar to you that you don't have an option to turn it off, or your spiritual ego is hijacking your experience and saying, well, okay, everything is God, there's nothing good or bad, like tune into it. But meanwhile, you're tuning into an energy that's literally harming you, right? That feeling of like, if you continue to tune into something that feels like that to you, there is like certain energetic consequences, and they can be healed quickly. But it's like, you know, like entities, for example, they like feeding on addictive energy, they like feeding on confusion, they like feeding on certain low states of energy. And when I say low, I mean anything less than clarity and love, clarity and sovereignty and love. Anything less than that, you know, certain astral beings like to feed on that. So, you know, mastering the astral body, it's like, if a lot of your desires, like, and I mentioned this in my explanation about pure desire comes from wholeness. If you don't feel whole and you're having all these desires, right, and they might feel exciting and they might feel expansive and they might feel like inspiration to you, my recommendation in order to get really clear on what's actually moving for you is to meditate, not just in the void and on silence, but meditate like with your upper chakras and really like feel what real inspiration feels like, right? Use visualization to feel a beam of light, right, coming from source, coming through your upper chakras and exploding out of your heart. Like, what does that feel like? Versus like, what does it feel like when I'm being, you know, when I feel excited and I want to move towards something? You'll begin to see more clearly, right? It will become visible to you that maybe things that you thought were like being inspired were actually maybe a desire for power, maybe a desire just for stimulation because there's an inability to be alone with oneself, right? In order to be able to tell what the astral body's activities are doing versus what your heart desires, you need to tune into heart energy, into love. And you need to make it very real and familiar to you so that you have the ability to discern what's moving through you. And why is this important? Well, every action, right, if you move from a place of lack, right, if you're so familiar with adrenaline, if you're so familiar with feeling like you're in bondage, if you're so familiar with rejecting parts of yourself, and then those parts seek activity, right? So you maybe men, you know, reject feminine parts of yourself, so you seek lots of like sexual partners that make you feel more like a man, right? See, this is how it works. It goes into activity, and the result of like the lack of discernment is more pain and suffering for you and everybody involved with those actions. And of course, like, the universe self-corrects and everything is well, all is well. But if you want to experience yourself moving from a place of love, you'll have to discern, right, what's moving through you, and visualizing and meditating like a verbal cue, like higher love. Really, I love that phrase, higher love. Like, just this huge nuclear love that I feel for all of life. Because if I feel that nuclear love, let's put it in the sexual context, right? I no longer see, like, if I'm a man, I no longer see women as like things to conquer. I see them as the children of God. If I'm like a woman, I will not like use my sexuality to harm or tease another. Like, if I love myself and my energy, I will choose what truly feels nourishing to my soul and not just, you know, pleasurable, right, in order to soothe a sense of lack within myself, right? So the most important thing in cultivating discernment is feeling whole and feeling free and feeling that you are love. So, you know, in a nutshell, discernment is really important. I mentioned on the tree of life, right, there's these two spheres that are called Gevura and Chesed. And it's the balance of mercy and compassion with discernment, right? With like severity, mercy and severity, like the severity, that sharp sword of discernment that helps me see, like, be real with myself, and I love it at the same time. I don't judge myself, I don't judge others for however they're showing up in this world. I simply see something clearly for what it is. I have love for it, and I either choose or do not choose to include it in my physical experience. Right? Those spheres are opposite each other because they represent a balance that we must achieve within ourselves in order to achieve the Christ consciousness, right? In order to truly achieve seeing the perfection and the love in all of life. That includes loving ourselves, right? By what we choose and what we don't choose, what we tune into and what we don't tune into. So this is like my, this was just a rant about discernment, and I'll speak more about discernment because I feel like people have really put it in their shadow, meaning they've disowned discernment because they didn't get to exercise it as children. They didn't get to say, oh, this feels off, and I'll honor that, right? Because they didn't have a chance to leave their home. They didn't have the ability to get away from their parents or whoever was taking care of them. And so the freedom to exercise discernment was put in the shadow, and it's time to bring it out of the shadow, right? If you are serious about awakening and about embodying unconditional love in this world towards yourself and the other forms of yourself in this world, it's something that must be anchored in your experience. That's my message, and have a beautiful day.